Right, so I want to talk about this story out of the Huffington Post, and it's titled Ontario accounted for 76% of the job growth in Canada over the past year. And getting right into it, you got the stats here. The country added a net 320,000 jobs, almost all of them 283,000 full time, according to Stats Canada. I don't really believe that. I would be shocked if it was actually that many full time. But nevertheless, let's just take it at face value. To cap off the run, December saw Canada's jobless rate drop three notches to 5.6%, and as the country added an unexpectedly large 35,000 jobs. But a large chunk of those December jobs, about 24,000, were created in one province, Ontario. There's a pattern that seems to be repeating again and again recently. In fact, even though Ontario accounts for 38% of Canada's population, it accounted for 76% of the jobs created in Canada in 2019. Now, this is interesting in a lot of aspects, I guess. I mean, first being that at a federal level and at a provincial level, they have different government. I mean, they do have some conservative seats and some liberal seats, but majority conservative provincially, majority liberal federally, which is, again, I don't understand how that exactly happens. Like, I mean, it's the same people voting. Like, I still don't really quite get why people do that. That's something I'd have to do more research into, but nevertheless, it happens and it happens everywhere. But it's pretty crazy. I mean, the main reasons is that when you look at the numbers here, the numbers pretty much line up perfectly with which provinces vote left and which provinces do the left rely on to get the vote. I mean, Eastern Canada and the PEI, Scotia, Brunswicks of the world. Those are liberal strongholds. Ontario is not a liberal stronghold, but they're getting enough to support them. And Quebec is, I mean, it's mostly bloc, but if there was no bloc, it would be liberal. So not only that, it has Justin Trudeau's riding. So yeah, the country or not the countries, the provinces that are doing the best are the liberal ones. But like I say, at a provincial level, Ontario is conservative. So I wouldn't, for all the far leftists that are like, oh, that's proof that leftist policies work and conservative ones don't. Well, it's not actually true, because if that were true, well, Ontario at a provincial level shouldn't be conservative, and not only that, Quebec is majority bloc. So I mean, there is a bit of a correlation. But the other thing too to look at is that job numbers aren't the only thing to point out too. Any government can go into massive amounts of debt and create jobs. Alberta is perfect proof of this. Whenever you talk to the NDP supporters in Alberta, they'll always cite that the NDP created more jobs than the Conservatives did, and they're right about that. But what they don't tell you is that the NDP government went into a massive amounts of debt to create those jobs. The other thing they don't tell you, which it's because they just think it's the right thing, is that a lot of those jobs were public sector jobs, and public sector jobs are a lot of times useless or relatively useless, in that if the jobs were actually required to run society, well, then the private sector would come in and take care of it, right? Unless the government regulates it to the point where it has to be a public sector job, like healthcare or something like that. But the whole point being is that in the big picture is that, like I say, you can see here Alberta had negative growth, Saskatchewan net zero, Manitoba 0.2, Newfoundland negative 2.6, but Newfoundland's such a small province that, I mean, I'm not really an expert in Newfoundland too. It's so far away, and like I say, it's a small province. But the points being is that Alberta, Saskatchewan, Manitoba, and I think the liberal strategy is kind of what should be the take home here, is that the liberal strategy is basically, I mean, whether it's willingly or unwillingly, I don't really want to assign motive. And at the very least, I think it's just looking out for their own self interest. You have the liberals or people on the left in general, who, if they want to get elected, they want to get reelected. Well, what they need to do is to try and convert people that didn't vote for them in the past, or at the very least, keep the same amount of people they have. The problem with the liberals is that they have a minority, which means minority governments generally don't last on average, so they need to get new voters. Well, I mean, the only way to get new voters is to convert people, like I say, that didn't vote for you before. And how do you do that? Well, a great way to do that is to get people reliant on the government to get by. And if you take people who, say in Alberta, who are oil and gas workers or former private sector workers, and you get them, on employment insurance, welfare, any of this kind of stuff, in other words, reliant on the government to get by, well, that's more likely to be like, hey, if the conservative, I mean, the other thing the left does too is they always have these scare tactics when they get elected, is that, if the conservatives get elected, they're going to get rid of all your free stuff, which a lot of that free stuff should be gotten rid of in a just and moral society, but they don't usually get rid of it. 90% of the time, they don't get rid of it. But that's what the left claims always to get elected, and people are dumb enough or brainwashed enough to say, "Oh, I think they're going to do that," but and there you get a leftist voter because they're afraid of getting their free stuff cut off, and that's the left strategy, and it's pretty manipulative, it's pretty immoral and unethical if you ask me, but that's how they do it, and the people at the top, all they care about is power, so they're going to tell people whatever they need to tell people to get by. And the people that vote for them, well, like I say, most of them are the rich ones are the virtue signalers. You have the woke celebrities. They're just virtue signaling because their public image means a lot to them, and they want to maintain that. So that's why they have the whole woke, far left thing going on, which Ricky Gervais called them out on that kind of stuff, rightfully so. But that's why they have that kind of stuff. The everyday leftist voter, and like I say, there's obviously exceptions to this rule because I know there's people going to be saying, "Oh, I know someone who doesn't fit into your, category," but most of them are just people who are number one, reliant on the government, and if their free goodies, ill-gotten goods get cut off, well then, in their mind, it's like, I'm going to die. How am I going to get by? So that's, they're going to keep voting for the left. Or on the other hand, you have people who perceive that, like I say, if their free stuff gets cut off, then they're going to die, and that's kind of where the left is, and that's where, like I say, that's where the left is. But anyway, like I say, I don't want to talk too much about this kind of stuff, but the main point being is that Alberta is really, really, really struggling, and not a whole lot's going to change because the left needs votes, and they're going to keep doing whatever it takes to get votes. And the only way for them to get more votes is to take chunks out of areas they haven't got votes, and that's the West. And Alberta is one of those areas. So Alberta, Saskatchewan, parts of Manitoba, all this kind of stuff. So that's kind of what they're going to do. If you ask me, it's just going to be more and more and more the same. You're going to have more immigration. You're going to have more taxes. They're going to keep raising the carbon tax until we have our yellow vest protest movements going on, and they're going to keep messing with the West until we stand up for ourselves. And like I say, one of the reasons why a lot of people are asking, well, why would they do this kind of stuff to Alberta? Why would they screw us over so bad? Well, it's because they know that we're never going to stand up for ourselves. They're basically, they know that we're never going to call their bluff. Basically, at least the majority of people. And like I said, all it would take is for half the right-leaning voting populace of Alberta to take a stand for things to change. Because if like I say, if half of the voting populace of Alberta decided, hey, we're not going to pay our federal income taxes, and like I say, I'm not advising people to do this. I'm just using it as an example. If half those people didn't pay their federal income taxes, then the system would go belly up, and it would force the federal government to do something. So yeah, I think I'll leave it there. I think I've got a lot of points across, but I mean, the take-home point being is this is just more bad news for Alberta, and it's more evidence to point out that the federal government only cares about people who support them, and they're going to do whatever it takes to get people who don't support them to support them. And pushing Alberta down, keeping Alberta and Saskatchewan down, is going to convert more and more people to vote for them. That's why they're pumping Alberta and Saskatchewan full of immigrants. And like I say, I'm not saying all immigrants are bad, but on average, they're leftist voters. And what happens when you get leftist governments? Well, the system goes belly up. So Yeah, so the things are gonna have to get better at one point or the other. I think the problem with that is that